Hi everyone, thank you for joining us as we approach our culminating discussions related to Esau, Edom. We're going to be now turning our attention to the theology and mythology of Esau with a little profile to go along with it. And as we start off our discussion, it's important to keep something in mind. There is a correlation between the Edom narrative and that of some of the Harry Potter characters, and in particular, a certain collective of children in the Harry Potter narrative. There are a number of things that we're going to talk about with respect to Esau, Edom's theology, but I want to point out a few things that have been picked up in the biblical narrative with respect to Esau, Edom. And this might help you to better understand some of the dynamics that we're going to be approaching as we talk about Edom's gods or Edom's deities. The first thing is, and people don't generally talk about this, is that Esau as a baby is presented as less than human. Number two, you have this dynamic of a baby, a child, not being fully loved by the mother, the father, or the brother. Ergo, Esau is presented as an outcast. Even at the beginning as an outcast, when you look at the description of Esau, the physical description of Esau, this is not the typical description of a baby, a human baby. Esau is also presented as extremely strong and aggressive, also impulsive. And then ultimately, with what took place with his mother, his father, and his brother, he is narcissistically wounded. And so you also have a dynamic where he is what is known as othered. He's othered physically, emotionally, and spiritually, and so therefore he's rejected. And this history of rejection brings us to this correlation between Edom or Esau and the Harry Potter children. And so in the narrative of the Harry Potter children, you see some themes related to maltreatment, whether you're talking about child abuse or child neglect. And the children in the Harry Potter narrative crave power. And so they crave this introjection of external power so that they can then control the world. They want to control others, not just themselves, but they want to control the actual environment. And what you find is when individuals feel out of control internally, they will often go overboard in terms of trying to seek external control. And they may do all sorts of things in order to manipulate the environment, manipulate circumstances in order for them to have a sense of power over their circumstances. And that includes over other people. And so that is a big part of the theme of Harry Potter. But what you also see here that might be missed is that you've got all of these basically wounded children in one way or another. And then you have this Esau narrative with this narcissistically wounded individual. And what you have when individuals are wounded is them exerting or giving to the world only that which they have inside of them. And so I want you to keep that in mind as we go through this analysis of Esau's theology. So now we're going to transition from analyzing Esau to looking at the dynamics of some of the individuals understood as the descendants of Esau or Edom. And so they are known as the Edomi. And we're going to look at these deities or these mythologies that are embraced by historically this particular collective of people. And so there is a specific deity that is associated with the Edomi. And the name of the deity is Kos or Cause. It also looks like chaos in some transliterations. And so there are multiple deities, even though you have this one name, there are multiple deities associated with the name. So we're going to talk about the first two, and then we're going to get into the main one. And so that spelling is Qos. There are some other spellings. We will talk about that. And so the initial deities that we're going to look at are these chimeric deities. And so these are these mixed breed deities that you see in mythology. And so these are the deities that, according to the historical narratives, are embraced by, worshipped by the descendants of Esau. So you have this chimeric goat, and a chimera is this blended entity. This chimeric goat, also known as a fawn, and you might think of it in terms of the astrological entity known as Capricorn. You also have another chimeric entity with respect to this cause or chaos, and it is the archer or the centaur, and it looks like the entity known as Sagittarius. And so in both instances, you have these chimeric entities that are blended based upon more than one entity, so two or more entities. Something that's also noteworthy is that if you actually go back and analyze the biblical narrative of Esau, what Esau sounds like is this chimeric goat. You have Esau described as looking like a little goat. His skin was like a little goat. He was hairy like a little goat. He smelled like a little goat. And this continued on into adulthood. And if you really deconstruct the Esau narrative, what you find is he is presented as almost a royal goat. He's not presented as a basic baby. He's presented as having a cloak, almost like a majestic kind of cloak in terms of his covering. Okay, so let's move on here. So we're talking about theology and the theology of the descendants of Esau. And theology embraces this construct of worship. And so we're talking about what did and do they worship. And so worship is about serving, honoring, adoration, reverence, and veneration. And so the first entity that is identified as cause, this god of Esau, is this fawn. And the fawn is F-A-U-N, but phonetically it is F-O-N. And so on the left-hand side, you see the baby fawn, and then on the right-hand side, you see the baby goat. And so you can see that the fawn is a blend of a number of entities. You see at the head, you see the ears and the little horns that indicate this goat-like dynamic. You see the face and the hair on the head looking like a baby's face and head, and then the upper part of the body resembling a baby's body, and then the bottom portion looking very much like the goat that you see on the right-hand side. And so the other name for this dynamic when you see this blending is a chimera. So in addition to the goat chimera deity that is worshipped by the descendants of Esau, you also have this centaur dynamic, which is also chimeric. And so you see this blending going on. And again, it's associated with the symbol known as Sagittarius. And so you see at the bottom, the entity has a horse-like bottom, and then a human-like top torso, but also with the bow and arrow. So the individual is considered an archer. And if you recall the narrative of Esau, Esau is understood as a hunter. And he is analogized with Nimrod in many ways. And so this individual has expert ability with respect to being an archer. And sometimes you see chimeras with multiple dynamics. And so you might see one body part in the bottom, another at the top. You may also see wings added. And so you might see a number of dynamics. And you see this in these entities that are worshipped by the descendants of Esau. And these are additional depictions that have been noted to be associated with the worship of the descendants of Esau. Now, this cause or chaos deity was understood as a national deity, and so this was the deity of those who were of the nation of the Edomim. There's also a belief that the bird that you see on the top of the head on the middle sculpture, that bird is supposed to also symbolize this cause or chaos. And now we're going to move to the big deity that is worshipped by the descendants of Esau or Edom. And so again, when we're talking about worship, we're talking about this is the deity, the national deity that is served by the descendants of Esau. They honor this deity. There's adoration, reverence, and veneration. And when you are dealing with the spelling of cause as Q-A-U-S, you have a transliteration of Z-A-G. And both of these translate to the dragon. And so the deity worshipped by the Edomi, the descendants of Esau, is what is known as the dragon. Again, as with the fawn and the centaur, you have another deity that is chimeric. And so you have this mythical deity that has components of multiple entities. And so you see in Strong's Concordance that this entity, this Tanah, is a dragon. A dragon is also understood, interestingly, as a female jackal. And the root for the Hebrew is this word tan or tan. And again, when you do the transliteration into the tan at 8565, you see that tan is this dragon, but a jackal. So that's the root. And Strong's goes on to expand on this idea of a dragon. So this worship of this dragon is the worship of this entity known as a jackal that howls mournfully in wasted places, so in desolate places. And you also have this association between this worshipped entity and the sea serpent. So you have this entity associated with dragon, jackal, a marine animal, and so a worship of a marine spirit or marine animals, a hideous land animal. And if you recall, all of this ties into another entity, which was the Leviathan. And here, continuing on at 8577, you see additionally that this entity, this Tanin, is known as a serpent, a dragon, a sea monster. And here you see this continuing focus on this worshipped entity being a dragon, also known as a serpent. And not only do you have this entity understood as a serpent, it's a specific type of serpent. It is a venomous serpent. So it is a poisonous serpent. It is a devouring entity. And so therefore you have this dragon. And what's also noteworthy is that when you look at all of these spellings of cause or chaos, it looks like chaos. And then you see here that this entity is the mythological personification of chaos. And so the dragon personifies chaos. Again, you see this indication of this dragon being synonymous with a serpent and a jackal. And here you see another word associated with dragon. It is dracon. And so you see again dragon and huge serpent, and this is at 1404. Also, this word dracon is associated with this idea of seeing. And so for the dragon or the dracon, this huge serpent, it is understood as the seeing one, meaning to see, and that it has powers to see things that other people can't see. And so it's believed to have incredible insight and be able to spot its prey. And so what you have are individuals who are worshiping a deity that has these qualities, or they believe it has these qualities, these serpent-like qualities. And as noted in the book of Revelation, this entity is understood as the enemy of the God that is in the Bible. And here you see additional transliterations with respect to this particular word, and you have this alternative form, which means to look. And so this dragon is this mythical monster that is worshipped, that is associated with this keen ability to see or to look into things or to observe things. And so here you have what is valued is this ability to be able to have powers that other people do not have, to be able to deconstruct things that other people cannot deconstruct, to take things apart and to see the nuance of things that other people may not be able to see. And so that is what is being valued in terms of this mythological creature. And again, you have this entity being understood as the great serpent, the dragon, and it is a figurative description of what is known as the devil. Now we're going to go into some translations and transliterations so that you can see how this construct is understood in a variety of languages and cultures. And so we're just going to do step by step looking at some of these languages. The name of the deity with this spelling was detected among the HMONG language. And it's detected as cause with the QAUS, and when it's translated into English, it is simply dragon. In the Haitian Creole, it is understood as dragon. This deity of the Idami is understood in the Yoruba as Dragoni. In the Japanese translation, you see an O inserted between the D and the R, and then you have the AGON. And in the Russian, cause is Drakon. In the Uzbek language, you see a bit of nuance here, and so that's where you start to see this Zaj with the ZAJ, but you also see dragon. In the Welsh, it appears as Drake. In the Dutch, you have a Drake. In the Latin, consistent with the Harry Potter character, you have Draco. And then in the Arabic, it looks substantially similar to what was in Strong's Concordance, and it is Tanin. Clearly, you can see there is consistency going across languages. This word is understood as a dragon. In the Georgian, you see Draconi. In the Hausa language, you have the deity for the Idami understood as dragon. In the Scots Gaelic, the god of the Idami is dragon. In Slovenian, you have Zaj and dragon. And here you have some notations related to the definition of this word dragon and Zaj. And you see that it's understood again as a mythical monster, like a giant reptile. In European tradition, the dragon is typically fire-breathing and tends to symbolize chaos, again, or evil. Whereas in East Asia, it is usually a beneficial symbol of fertility associated with water and the heavens. This is also another term for flying dragon. And when you see these oddities come up in terms of translations, you have to do some more back and forth to make sure that you have consistency with respect to the translation, the transliteration. And you see very clearly here that when Zaj is translated between English and the HMONG, it is dragon. Now, of course, some individuals might offer that the descendants of Edom might view this entity more consistent with what is understood in the Far East. However, Esau, Edom, those entities were not in the Far East. And so there's a high likelihood that there is a more centralized understanding of what this entity represented. And additional etymology analysis with the word Zaj indicates that it is related to this idea of danger, jeopardy, or peril. And you see that it is again coming out of the Far East, indicating dragon. Now, because this has spiritual dynamics to it, it's important to also look at the secular understanding of the term. And so what you see here with dragon in terms of etymology is that, again, it is understood as a huge serpent, a dragon, a serpent, a giant sea fish, also again meaning to see clearly, and also associated with this idea of light. And earlier words for dragon include drake and dragoon. You also see the indication at the bottom with tan, meaning a desert mammal, now believed to be the jackal. And again, here as a noun, you see that dragon is drake, draca, dragon, meaning a huge serpent. Now recall that we already made the analysis of Esau having this sort of correlation with the fawn or the goat being understood in terms of that description of Esau as a baby and then even as an adult being associated with these goat-like qualities. And so the dragon is also associated with this idea of monster, and a monster is essentially a malformed animal or human in terms of etymology. There is an ominous quality to a monster. It's seen as a portent, as a sign. A monster is also understood as something that is an abomination. And so monsters were understood as abnormal animals. They were seen as signs of impending evil. It also includes these animals that we just discussed, these animals that are composed of parts of various creatures like the centaur or the griffin. It's an animal of this huge size. And it's also understood as a person who has the ability to execute inhuman forms of cruelty or wickedness. And so a monster sort of portends calamity, terror, and distress. And so now you should begin to see the correlations with the Harry Potter narrative and this deity that is worshipped by those who are understood as the descendants of Esau. And so you can understand why this is understood as Edom's house. This is the house of Slytherin, and in the middle you see Draco. Now we're going to look at a few more historical narratives as we begin to wrap this up. And so while these creatures may be wrapped up in mythos, you also see manifestations of this name in reality. And so you see that this name, Cause or Chaos, is a city in Iraq. In terms of geography, you also see a city in Yemen with this name, Cause or Chaos. You also see this gate in Palestine associated with Bethlehem carrying this name, Cause or Chaos. We're going to quickly look at a couple of notations in this Introduction to World Religions text. And the text indicates that this name, Cause, was Edom's national god, and the name formed many personal names, and so you saw it as the root or part of a number of names that Edomites or Edomi had. One example is Cause Gabar, meaning Cause is mighty. And you see reiterations of Cause being associated with the serpent. And you see the serpent understood as a monster, as we've discussed, and a dragon. And this is another source that you might want to check out. It's the religion of Idumea and its relationship to early Judaism. And this text just goes over some historical backdrop in terms of the Edomi and their religion. There's also indication that some of the Edomi worshipped the God of the Old Testament of the Bible. There's also a discussion about the relationship between the kingdom of Edom and the Iron Age, and also this deity known as Cause. And you can see these variations in terms of spelling. You see Qaus, Qos, and then Qws. And this goes on to talk about some ancient inscriptions where you find the name Cause. And these are additional notations related to different groups in the area and the deities that they worshipped. You even have here a house with the name Cause in the house. And here you can find a general overview discussion related to this deity known as Cause, or Kos, or Kose, or Chaos. And so now you can see the relationship between the narrative for the Harry Potter children and those who are understood as the descendants of Edom in terms of this pantheon of deities that have been invoked. And so you have this group of children who are attempting to exert power over the environment and power over other people. And then you see the same dynamic with the selection of these pantheon deities. You have, again, the goat hybrid, you have the centaur, and ultimately you have this dragon, this serpent, which is again consistent with this house of Slytherin and Draco. And so as we wrap this up, we have looked at this profile of Esau starting off that might actually serve to inform the theology of Esau's descendants and this variation in terms of these deities that have been selected for the pantheon. You might have a better idea now of the goals of the descendants of Esau with respect to the selection of these particular entities. You also see that there is a focus and a value of entities that are understood as mythological chimeras. And so not just one entity, but an entity that has components of multiple creatures. And so chimeras are thought of as sort of super entities. But ultimately what you are seeing in terms of this pantheon is a desire, an extreme desire for power and control. And this appears to undergird this particular selection dynamic with respect to the pantheon. And perhaps you have some additional insights with respect to this pantheon. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.